All right, this year we are doing just a quick study of the Second World War. And today we're going to start that conversation with talking about Japanese expansion in Asia. Now, we got a lot of reasons that this expansion is going to take place beyond just the fact that Japan wants to grow as an imperial power. Japan feels it needs more land for resources. We've got political instability in China in the 1920s. This is coming in the aftermath of the collapse of the last Chinese dynasty and rival factions throughout China looking to take control of that state. And we see two main factions by the 1920s. One party known as the Kuomintang, or the GMD, led by Jiang Jieshi or Chiang Kai-shek, and then the Communist Party of China led by Mao Zedong. By the time we're getting to the late 1920s, a civil war is breaking out between these two factions. And if you're Japan, it looks like China is there for the taking, especially that region of Manchuria that you are so interested in. We've also got some political and military instability in Japan. Japan's military is going to be making moves on the continent of Asia into Manchuria without the emperor's sanction. And it's starting to look as if the Japanese military is acting on its own without any control from the democratically elected government or the emperor. Then we get the Great Depression. Beginning in 1929, the Great Depression has a tremendous impact on Japan, which requires international markets to be thriving for its own economic success. The United States is going to launch a tariff called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act that will dramatically increase prices of imported goods in the United States, which is going to hurt an export nation like Japan. And this will crush Japanese exports in the United States and elsewhere, and lead to a rising unemployment in Japan. And so Japan is going to see the Asian mainland, in particular this region of Manchuria, as a vital source for raw materials if those raw materials might be threatened from the West, things like oil and steel, things that Japan traditionally purchased from a nation like the United States. The Great Depression is putting those purchases in question. So this is, in essence, living space for the Japanese and what they see as their only means of survival, that being expansion. So the Japanese military in Manchuria that was overseeing Japanese interests there for the previous couple decades will move to seize Manchuria against the emperor's wishes. This begins in 1931 with what is known as the Mukden incident, where a Japanese-owned railway is blown up. The Japanese army, this Kwangtung army in Manchuria, will claim it was an attack by the Chinese, and that's going to lead to the Japanese army moving against Manchuria. By early 1932, Manchuria was completely under Japanese control. The results of this crisis will be a worsening of relations between Japan and Western powers like the United States. It will receive condemnation from the League of Nations, but that's really it. The League of Nations will put together an investigatory committee. It's called the Leighton Committee, to investigate what happened and ultimately to call on Japan to withdraw from Manchuria. But Japan won't withdraw. And in fact, they just leave the League of Nations. And the League of Nations does nothing following Japanese withdrawal. This seems to be an abandonment of this internationalist idea that had previously existed in the 1920s. In China, the Kuomintang or the Communist Party of China, neither of them were very focused on what's going on in Manchuria because of their own civil war. Japan is going to benefit economically from the resources it can now pull out of Manchuria. And Italy and Germany are going to learn that the League of Nations is really a toothless organization, that it has no intention of stopping aggressive states. Tensions in East Asia will grow even more by 1937 with the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War, the first one being back in the 1890s. This is now the invasion of mainland China by the Japanese military. A ground war supported by devastating air raids from the Japanese Air Force will result in countless Chinese casualties of military and civilians. This war features the infamous rape of Nanjing, with the Kuomintang government having moved from Beijing to Nanjing. It's going to become a target for the Japanese, and the Japanese army will commit horrible atrocities and crimes against humanity in the conquest of this city. Following the Second Sino-Japanese War, we're going to have a realization that this is not going to be a quick war for the Japanese. In fact, it won't end until World War II itself comes to an end. There is now stronger Chinese nationalism. Zheng Jixi of the Kuomintang and Mao Zedong of the Communist Party will actually join forces against the Japanese. Chinese guerrillas will launch a guerrilla warfare campaign against the Japanese, and this fighting will continue for years. Japan will never be able to defeat China during this war. There's also international outrage over the atrocities that people are hearing about from this Japanese invasion. Japan, for its part, is claiming the creation of what it calls a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, that the Japanese are merely trying to drive out foreign influence and create a more prosperous Asia for all Asians. But really, they're just looking out for their own self-interests. In the aftermath of this invasion, and with a worsening relationship between Western powers in the United States and Japan, Japan will move to create its own alliances, signing on to the Tripartite Axis Pact with Germany and Italy in September of 1940. This is going to allow Germany and Italy to focus just on Europe, while Japan can focus on East Asia. It also gives Japan the ability to move against colonial holdings in Asia, those colonies being held by countries like France or the Netherlands. In 1941, in April of 1941, Japan will sign a treaty of neutrality with the Soviet Union. And again, this will ease Japanese concerns about its northern borders and allow them to focus more on Southeast Asia, which they will do in December of 1941 when Japan pushes into Southeast Asia and in the French colonies of Indochina. Now, Japan's early moves into Indochina will result in an embargo by the United States of Japan. We won't sell them anything anymore. Negotiations between the United States and Japan will fail to result in any resolution to this tense situation, and Japan will prepare for an attack against the United States and other colonial powers in Southeast Asia. That attack, of course, comes on December 7th, 1941, with the Pearl Harbor attacks. The same day, Japan would also launch attacks against the British colonies in Hong Kong and Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, American bases in the Philippines, and Malaya as well. And that's all that we've got for today. We'll be back next for a quick run through escalation of tensions in Europe by Italy and Germany. See you next time.